Hi, my name is Erin Lowry. This is my sample teaching video for teaching pronunciation. It's a mock video. I don't have any students to work with or even any human beings right now. But this is just to give you an idea if I were to be teaching a pronunciation class to an advanced level group of students at the university, what I would do. Okay? So what I'd like to talk about today, the lesson that I'm going to teach or run through with you is working with prominence and working with thought groups as far as making requests goes. So I wanted to choose a topic that would be something that students would need to work on, but that wasn't doing rote pronunciation drills or inside of a pronunciation class per se. So my target teaching population, thinking back to the groups of students that I've had before at university level, would be from multiple backgrounds, from multiple language backgrounds, from multiple education backgrounds. So I had groups of students that were from Asia, that were from Latin America, that were from the Middle East, all mixed together. So this would be a kind of class that I would work on with them and that we would break down individually, but that's a bit hard to show when you don't have students. So I'll kind of talk through it. Yeah. Like I said, they'd be advanced level. The class time would be 75 minutes plus homework. And I'll talk a little bit about what would happen in the class before and what would happen in the class after. Other things that you might like to know, what I'm shooting for the students to be able to do is to take what they're using in pronunciation or what they're learning in class, what we're going over, and be able to apply that in a real context. So that would be why I chose making requests, because students that I had oftentimes, when you took a look at the patterns that they were using as far as intonation, as far as rhythm, as far as phrasing, as far as thought groups goes, which are a little... So the rationale behind me choosing this activity would be that students oftentimes need to know how to be polite and be appropriate in communities of speech that are outside of the classroom. So when we're talking about making requests, it's a speech act that they'll have to deal with, whether their TAs dealing with students, whether they're students dealing with their own professors, if they're in the lab, if they're at a restaurant, if they're talking with other people in other situations like at the grocery store. It's something that they're going to have to be able to do, and that students oftentimes do, but it's not exactly the patterns that we're looking for as native speakers. So my students oftentimes would make a request and it would be a lot longer than it needed to be or a lot shorter than it needed to be, but it wasn't necessarily appropriate for the situations that we were looking at. So that was one of the reasons that I wanted to take a look at making requests and how pronunciation works into that. So before this class, the students would have looked at thought groups and prominence. Right, this would be an example. Let's see if I can get it close enough here. This is from Well Said. And these are kind of the rules, but the rules aren't set, and it doesn't necessarily tell you how to do things in context. It says, well, this is how it should sound. But then what I found is that the students have problems knowing how to apply that in the appropriate context, right? So we would have previously gone over phrases and thought groups as well as prominence. And I would start out with the class with a little drama activity, yeah? So I have a drama game here that I like because it works on prominence, it works on being able to say words and phrases in different ways, right? The original title of the game is Words into Movement, but I would probably leave out the movement part, right? So you have words like silence. How many different ways can you say silence, right? So students could work in pairs or small groups, and necessarily if it was a large group of students. And what they would have to do first is figure out how many different ways they could say these words. So you have babies, you have lunch, you have wait, right? And I would probably have some more, depending on the size of the group. So they would go through those, and we would move right into an activity. So what situations are difficult for students when they're making requests? What kind of places, what kind of settings do they feel comfortable making requests? Do they think that there's anything missing than what they do? Is there any difference that they've seen in how they might make a request as opposed to how a native speaker or a speaker of a different language background might make a request, right? Is it any different how they would make a request in English as opposed to their own native language? So we would have a short discussion, and depending on how eager the students are to speak, it might take anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes. It all depends on the group. But it is something that I would want to know from them. So as far as making requests, we might talk about those different situations. After that, before we actually talk about strategies and about going back over some of the things that they might already know as far as the language side of it goes, the grammar side, the structure side, what they actually say, as opposed to how they say it, I would have them work on a short matching activity in pairs, right? So what they would need to do here, and I'll kind of zoom in so you can see, and hopefully you can see this. If not, I'll go over them, right? So they have these different settings. There's 7 different settings. And to go with those 7 settings, they have 7 different cards, basically. So there would be one of these for each group, right? Or it would be a handout. So they need to match the request with the setting it happened in, right? So this might take a while, but what they need to do while they're looking at these, they need to think of, okay, why did I match this request to this setting, right? There's no one right answer, per se. These are examples that were gathered from actual people in actual places by another teacher. So what are the relationships between the speakers that you would see? If this is the person who's making the request, what's their gender, what's their age, maybe what's their occupation? What does the speaker want the person that they're speaking to do, actually? And how do they soften the request to make it not so direct, right? How do you think they might change the tone of their voice, pitch, intonation, actually how it's said, right? So there would be some discussion that goes along with this. And depending on the students, again, this could take 10, 15, 20 minutes even, depending. So after we've done this matching activity with making requests, we would go back and look at some of the strategies, right? And look at the language that's used if necessary. It all depends on the students and how advanced they are, right? Because they probably, like I said before, have the grammar but might not necessarily have the cultural background or the pronunciation background to use things correctly in a context, right? So after this activity, we would look at several different role plays. So I have here a role play that is looking at a Japanese speaker of English and a native English speaker, right? And how they would make the same request. So for example, the first situation here is borrowing a pen from your teacher, right? And how the Japanese learner actually did this. So this is a transcript of what another teacher saw in their classroom as opposed to a native English speaker, right? So this was recorded or noted down and then transcribed. And the second situation is making an appointment to see your teacher in order to ask about your studies. So these are situations that the students might find themselves in, and you have, again, an example of a Japanese learner of English and a native English speaker, right? So the students would need to figure out what's the purpose, what are the status of the speakers, what are any problems that they found, not grammatical problems, but if we were listening to a recording or if we were acting these out, what are the things that they might find problematic? There's an evaluation form, right? So it gives you the different request strategies that exist. It gives you how they were softened, what are the different words or phrases that were used, what are the sentences that kind of support what's going on? Are they indirect? Are they direct? Is it appropriate the way that it's said? And what are the different pronunciation features, right? So this is something that can be used as a guideline when you're talking about how requests are made, how tone and pitch affect these kinds of things, as well as when the students are actually doing their role plays. So the idea would be that this is used when you're having these discussions. And then later on, once they did the second role play, which they actually have to come up with the situations and how they would deal with them, the students can go back and listen to each other and say, okay, this is what this person was doing. I did this, I didn't do this, right? So that would basically be the lesson. That would take up 75 minutes.